We are in the Culver Hotel.
Which is lovely.
We filmed here a little bit in season 2. And I remember, I don't know if it's still there, I didn't look outside, but there was a window display to do with the Wizard of Oz. Because I believe the soundstage that we film on for Masters is the soundstage where they shot Wizard of Oz, 1. 2, apparently this hotel is where a lot, after they finished days' work on Wizard of Oz, people would come here.
Really?
Yeah. So there was like a window display of Wizard of Oz when we got here, which was great.
My mom's gonna watch this and kill me that I didn't let her know that the Wizard of Oz was shot in the same studio. She's
Every single day that we go into work, I think of Munchkins. That's not a joke. I really do. For a series that has been, had a lot talked about it in terms of its portrayal of women and female issues, female-specific issues, and the role of a woman in society, and all those kind of things, which I think it is incredibly strong about. Obviously, my journey and our journey will be one of, about what is masculinity, what is a man, what is the role of a man, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that, about how, because that doesn't get talked about much with this show, and yet it's obviously a sort of dominant thing for us in some ways, in different ways. That it explores the nature of what is masculinity, what was it then, what does it become now, and what is the role of a man in this society. And obviously for your character, Beau, that's a big thing.
Scully's a closeted gay man. What I really love about this show is Michelle Ashford and the other writers really put out there for examination the idea that we should not be defined as human beings by our sexual preference or appetites, but we should be defined by our capacity to love. And I think that's just beautiful. And it's certainly true the way my character, along with my wife, Allison Janney, how we're portrayed, because here's, Michelle told me early on, she said, I want you two to be the most together couple. I thought that was such an odd thing that you were saying, because we go through all this, these challenges of how do we stay together and everything when I'm gay and she didn't know it before and all this stuff, and we're revealing ourselves to each other. But it's also obvious that we really love one another. And there's a strength in that. And I remember, just feeling myself about, feeling good about that, love is the most important thing, and the other stuff kind of comes along with it.
Because like with a character like Langham, where in some ways the sort of like cliched idea of what it is to be masculine and a man comes, he's having sex with all these different women, like a real, hound.
Yeah.
And that would be a more cliched idea, especially of that time, I suppose, as well.
Right.
That's so masculine. What did you feel like? What were your thoughts around that idea of like manliness and Langham?
Yeah, it was interesting. I feel like he sort of embodies that role superficially as best he can. You want to dress like this. You want to drive this car. You want to do this profession, you want to go to this university, sort of tick all the right boxes, and then throw into it, you're married and have a family, and that's what you're supposed to do. But there's this, certain, the mentality that he has, and I think it does play into his idea of, well, yeah, this is what being a man is. It's if you're not happy at home, you go out and you take what is yours, you satisfy these appetites. And it's really just about, I think, trying to fulfill an idea. And also he clearly, I think, is much more complex in that he has, I think, issues around self-worth and value. And
is that what he's getting from the string of conquest that he has?
I think so. I think that there are deep unmet needs. In my own sort of research, reading about men who behave this way, typically it's linked back to, like a domineering mother, or not feeling like you were valued or had a voice growing up, and creating a sort of a power imbalance, and that being a way to, fulfill this thing that was never fulfilled growing up. I think he uses sex as a vehicle to try to achieve these things without even knowing.
I mean, the idea of masculinity and virility, I'm thinking specifically for Lester and for Bill as well, but in this season, a big through line for both our characters was the idea of impotency, of not being able to perform. How do you think that impacts, well, first of all, what do you think Lester's sense of himself as a man is anyway? And how does that particular area that we explore affect his sense of himself as a man?
I think Lester initially, his sense of himself as a man was like kind of on the cusp anyways. He knew, I think he had a sense that he's mostly an intellectual being. And then the impotence almost to me felt like it confirmed his like worst fears. Like, oh, I'm just a brain now.
Right. What comes first though, the chicken or the egg? Does he regard himself as an intellectual being because there's some kind of issue around that?
I mean,
he identifies himself as that?
Obsessed with the stories of other people's lives through like his obsession with film and also all these male leads and masculinity from movies, that he's smart enough to look at films and be like, well, I know who I'm not.
Yeah.
I know I'm not Ben-Hur. I know.
That's a big theme in the show generally, I think. The idealized version of what it is to be a man, what it is to have sex, what it is to be in a relationship, and then the real version. And he's got an extreme sense of that.
And then I think it's why we saw him kind of give up the idea. Like, oh, once it stopped, he stopped being able to be a man in that sense. He was like, well, this just isn't, my life just won't be this. I just won't have this.
And for Robert, it's presumably even more a complicated question because there's the sense of himself as a man, just in terms of what's going on, but also his sense of himself as a man within a culture that is already saying you are not equal. Yeah. How does that factor into his sense of masculinity?
Yeah, absolutely. Often, during this era, you're often black before you are anything else.
Right.
You're black before you are a man, and if you stand up for yourself or stand up for your community, there are consequences, sometimes death. And for Robert to be a man in a sense and stand up for his sister, Coral, and show up in this neighborhood in 1958, I don't think you can get any more manly than that. He risks his life in a sense because again, there could be a backlash. You don't know what can come of that.
How did you all find? Because we've all done it now in this series. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club this season.
Thank you.
Of getting your kid off and doing sex scenes. What was your experience?
Mine was
of
a
that?
dream. I just laid there and a beautiful woman writhed around on top of me and I was mostly clothed. So for me, I don't know that
it's the dream ticket.
It's really that, like, I left that day, I was like, this is not the worst day at work. Like I was still pretty terrified. It's not a thing I'd ever had to do before.
What was it that was terrifying? Specifically?
They never explained to me at what stage of undress I would be. So leading up to it, I was like, well, what am I going to be wearing? And then at one point, one of the writers was like, showing you without clothes gets us nothing.
Oh, that wasn't very kind.
And I was like, well, we can all agree on that. They were like, we don't get anything from show. And with the scene with Betsy too, later on, they were like, you without your shirt up doesn't get us nothing. It was Ark, and he goes, we're gonna cut to her. And I was like, yeah, that makes absolute sense. But yeah, it's still very, I don't know. Taking off your clothes taking off my clothes alone still feels awkward. Like it's not so.
Like at home alone.
Yeah, at home I do it as quickly as I possibly can. So like there around other people, it was still very like. But I did feel like I'm in show business. Like we're doing a thing without clothes. That counts.
You know what I think audiences don't realize is when we do these sex scenes or we take our clothes off or whatever, we rehearse it with the director and usually the crew's not around, and then they bring the crew in, and these guys are going to record it now. So now it becomes all about the technology of how they do it, because they have to do it in a beautiful, imaginative way, and that takes a lot of care and intelligence on their part. But we as actors, then we have to make sure that when we embrace this way, that our heads are kind of turned here so the light catches us this way. So it becomes like this weird choreographed dance, doesn't it, that we do, and and then after you rehearse it that way, then I guess, what I try to do is then just release and give myself up to the experience.
Full release?
Well, that's for me to know and you to find out.
The wardrobe people.
And it's pretty challenging. I mean, you guys had to get naked the most, you and Teddy.
Well, I know Caitlin had quite a complicated relationship with the sex scenes in our show so far, because on the one hand, she didn't get to do many of them, but on the other hand, she, which was both a matter of relief to begin with. Well, this is what I'm building up to. She was, in the first season and for the first part of the second season, she would watch me and Lizzie doing these scenes, or whoever it might be, and on the one hand, I think she was quite relieved that she didn't have to do it, because she'd see how worked up everyone would get and how scary it would be. But on the other hand, I think she sort of felt like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I get to do these sex scenes? And then enter Robert. How was that? How did you did you experience that?
There was a lot of preparation going into that. We
liquid preparation?
Yeah, well, I'll get to that in a second. But we had a meeting with the writers and the director, and they wanted to make sure that we were comfortable, and there was all the complexities of what was going on in the civil rights era, and what's going on with Libby, and how this is going to be different, for her. And so after I felt, after the meeting was done, and by the time we had done the deed on the kitchen floor, it was so much, more fun and comfortable than the meeting itself. Talking about it, is that can be a little tense. But it did have a little courage juice, just a little bit. I heard that there was an actor. I had never done one that was so intense, and I didn't know what to expect. And I heard that there was an actor who had just a little bit of courage juice before all of his scenes, and I said, let me try this out.
Was it in the morning, or was it like at the last scene of the day? Because if it's at 7 or 8 a.m., it's different than when it's at 7 p.m. when you're, it's like, something about when it happens too.
We started the day with it.
Oh, you did?
We started the day with it, so...
that's tougher.
I was just thinking, no one asked me if I was comfortable with anything. They were just like, this is happening on Wednesday.
I think they just assumed that discomfort is your go-to.
To be fair.
Go-to place.
I mean,
They want you comfortable.
Lizzie's the only one who was like, you should get a spray tan. Oh, wow. And then she got a spray tan at her house, and I looked absolutely ridiculous. I looked so stupid.
Well, Lester with a spray tan.
Is that what you got? Did the makeup artist come to your trailer and
No, because she's like, look, if you got it, get a spray tan because it takes so much longer. Plus, I have tattoos. They were like, it'll take so much longer for the makeup people to get it. Just get a spray tan. You'll save 45 minutes or an hour. Okay. So I went to her house and got in this bizarre tent with a woman I had just met. Right. And was naked as the day I was born, and she sprayed me like I'd done something wrong.
Like I'd done something.
And then I went home and just ruined a set of sheets because I didn't the timing was off. You're supposed to. I got the whole thing wrong. I ruined some sheets, and then it got on my. I fell asleep like this, so it was on my palms. I couldn't get it off my palms. I used lemon juice.
Why'd you fall asleep like this?
I don't know. That's how I sleep. It's like a sarcophagus.
Yeah, it's comforting.
Yeah, I just thought it was fun. It went by really quickly as well.
Yeah, mine went done quick. The one with the scene with the prostitute was over so quick, and then it was gone. And there'd been so much talk about it that it was over, and we kind of high-fived, and she went on her way, and it was like, I haven't seen her since.
I remember there was a scene where when Bill starts going to see some prostitutes in season 2, and there was a scene where
Plural?
we were in an alleyway. And the scene is that Bill is being given a blowjob by a prostitute, and she's not really getting anywhere. But and it was like the last scene of the day. It was about 2 a.m, and we turn up, and this the actress who was playing the prostitute, had been waiting around for ages. In fact, I had to do 2 scenes next to each other because there were 2 prostitutes that he goes to see. So these 2 actresses have been there. And it's in an actual alleyway, which is not the nicest of places to be, but just because there's lights there and a film crew doesn't stop it being a dirty alleyway.
Still very alley.
So it was all that. Anyway, we turn up there, it was the last thing of the day, and I was very aware that, everyone just wanted to go home, really. It'd been a long day, everyone was tired. But these 2 people, this was their job of work. This was the only thing they were doing that day. So the last thing you want, and they're going to be vulnerable, they're having to pretend. And like you say, the talking about it can be more awkward. Pretending to be given a blowjob in reality was more awkward than talking about it, to be honest. But you're just sort of trying to be careful. So I was trying to really make an extra effort to not just be like, let's get this done and go home. And you'd be hi, do you want a mat for your knees and all this? So this actress is on her knees in front of me, I'm using my coat to kind of hide. We're checking the distance where her head should be and all this kind of stuff. And just before they say action, just as we're in position and ready to go, she looks up at me and she said, I think she was South African. And she looked up to me and she said, my mother really likes you. Would it be possible to get a photograph? and I remember just going, sure, not right now, though. I don't think this is the photograph that your mother would love.
Probably more of an arm-in-arm situation.
Yeah, maybe later. Yeah, so we...
How is it scary for you? Like, particularly, you talk about the young lady. I remember when the scene with you and Lizzie, where you were going down on her, and you were naked, and the camera pulls back, and I was just saying that must have been frightening for you to do that. Like, what is that like? Or that and doing the scenes as a whole?
Yeah, it's, well, on the one hand, I think me and Lizzie have become so comfortable with each other now that's not an issue, you know, so, because there's lots of different elements, aren't there, when you come to do a scene like that. There's just the fact, whoever you're doing it with, there's that, you know, like, oh, I hope you don't think and the awkwardness and trying to make sure that's okay. Then there's the having to talk, like you said, having to talk with the director or whoever it might be about the scene. So inevitably you're having to draw on your own experiences. So that becomes slightly awkward potentially. And then there's the other thing of filming it and everyone else being there and watching it. And there's all those different aspects. And then just being physically naked, maybe. There's that. Mainly my issue is in myself, I think. Being naked and that kind of stuff, depending on how I'm feeling about myself that day, that could be tricky. And then I mean, I've always said, and I don't mean this flippantly, I genuinely mean it, that it's the scenes where you're emotionally more naked then, you know, where you're being vulnerable. Obviously, doing the sex stuff and being naked makes you vulnerable as an actor anyway, but it's when that is connected to what's going on in the scene as well. So, you know, because we said from the beginning, we talked about the idea that, you know, whenever there is sex in this series, it can't just be sex for its own sake. It has to be, it's like a Sondheim song. It has to continue the narrative. It has to push the story forward. You know, it can't just be, and now we stop and sing, or now we stop and fuck. Yeah. It has to be for real, and we learn something's revealed in doing it. And very often with, you know, for Bill and Virginia's storylines, every time there's something sexual happening, that is sort of the least of it in a way. You know, it's what is going on between them through that sex scene. So the ones where, I think Lizzie would say the same thing, the scenes where through an act of sexuality in some way, that your character is allowing them to do, or pushing the envelope of what they're comfortable with, and especially for Bill, I think, you know, there are certain sex scenes in season 2, especially where, going back to the idea of manliness and masculinity, there are things that he's much more comfortable with because it's manly, supposedly. You know, he just takes her and puts her up against the wall and fucks her up against the wall. He's okay with that. And I, as an actor, you know, when I'm doing that, I don't feel so vulnerable. You know, that's expressing a certain element of Bill and that I'm okay with. When I have to stand there and do something that Bill is really uncomfortable with doing, like being told by Virginia, strip, standing in the middle of a hotel room and just taking all your clothes off and then going down and all that kind of stuff. It's not just the act of it, it's the fact that Bill is so uncomfortable with that, and yet he's sort of offering that up to her, almost like a sort of sacrificial thing, you know, there's something ritualistic about it, and that inevitably makes me, as an actor, feel much more vulnerable, much more uncomfortable. That's much harder. But there are other scenes where I just take my clothes off and I feel fine about it. Yeah. But it's that vulnerability, and that's what I always keep coming back to with this entire story, season 1, pilot, season 1, and season 2. So it's a story about how do we as human beings deal with vulnerability.
My sense of the set is that you and Lizzie together say some of the most disgusting things I've ever heard in my entire... That the comfort between you two at this point...
It's too comfortable.
...is of a level that is disturbing for everyone else.
There are moments where it becomes suddenly clear to me, not everybody has gone through the experience that me and Lizzie have gone through, and not everybody is as comfortable with certain things, and suddenly, like the disconnect suddenly becomes glaringly obvious now and again when you look at people like either pretending they haven't heard what's being talked about, or just disgusted or just saddened.
And to be fair, you're not, Lizzie, far more disgusting than you are.
I would. Lizzie would probably say that's not true, but I agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, the nature of the show. On the one hand, the fact that we're, dealing with the things we're dealing with and having to talk about the things we're talking about, it does up the ante a little when it comes to backstage banter.
Yeah, for sure.
Usually people try to kind of be a bit shocking or, a bit whatever backstage, but you've got to really go something to take it up a notch when you're in between takes.
Yeah.
And it does seem to go a little bit into the stratosphere. I mean, I felt like, in this season, dealing with civil rights movement and race relations in the country and stuff, it was a brave move. It was like a bold thing to take on.
Absolutely.
And I remember talking about it with Michelle and Sarah and saying, I think we've got to be very careful that we don't just pay lip service to this. I think if you want to get into this subject, you have to really get into this subject. It was just very interesting. It was very unexpected, I thought. Could you maybe talk about how you felt about that?
Speaking of unexpected, what was shocking was the parallels that were happening in Ferguson and St. Louis in our modern time. And it just kind of shows that much like the taboo of sex in this country, we've come a long way, but we've still got a long way to go. And I thought that was odd and unfortunate that here I am doing a scene where a cop is roughing me up in St. Louis. Yeah. And the same sort of thing is happening today. So, like you said, I think the writers, Michelle, they've done such a great job. I think it was a bold move. And it's good to know that you felt that, if you were going to do it, you couldn't pay it lip service. You had to go all the way in. And you addressed lots of issues, not only just the race relations between myself and Libby. And then I love how, I would be talking to people at home who were watching, and they went from, hating Libby for what she had done to Coral, to rooting for her, to rooting for me when I show up on the doorstep, to hating me when I ask her to go get the sandwiches. And I thought they made it intricate and interesting.
Well, because I think as a general thing with the show Masters of Sex, one of the things that I've always tried to push and that I really like about the show is that idea of where does an audience's sympathies lie at any given point. And there's the obvious thing, like, for instance, just in terms of my character and Lizzie's character, Virginia, it seems, it's too easy to go, she's the likable one and he's the unlikable one. And it confounds that. The moments where that becomes reversed or, and the same with all the characters, that there's an obvious way of playing all these sort of characters, I suppose, and there's certain kind of archetypal roles that they usually have in a story like this. And the moments that I really enjoy are where that gets subverted somehow. And I think that's something that will continue generally. But that always seems to me the more revealing moments about a character where, like you say, where you suddenly go, hang on, I like that, but now they're doing something morally reprehensible, and I don't know how I feel about them now. And it always begs the question, I think, what would I do? Do I do that? And I think one of the things that I've tried to do with Bill is to kind of be the worst part, and of me, Michael, as well as the worst part of the audience. And I think it really is difficult. For an audience, I think, to kind of deal with that, and I like that.
The writers, I'm sorry, but the writers even caught me off guard with that a couple of times. I'm like, okay, I'm Robert, I'm the likable character, I'm standing up for civil rights, and then comes the episode where we're passing out flyers, trying to convince the residents to go on a rent strike, and I knock on the door, and the young lady opens the door, and she's upset at me because I've kind of probably come through a couple of nights in a row and had my good fun and left her. So it's like Robert isn't the man necessarily that,
Because people are complicated. Yes, people have all light and shade, and I think, I think more and more as TV is evolving, TV stories and series are evolving. We're seeing more and more difficult characters, and I think one of the things that's great about this show and a few other shows is that there are not only difficult men, but there are difficult women as well. And, you know, that's something that there hasn't been maybe enough of. Yeah. But just the fact that as audiences are having to deal with people who are three-dimensional. They're not just good guys and bad guys. You know, it's very difficult to know who the bad guy in this story is. Yeah. That's true. You know, it's too easy to go, Bill's the bad guy. He's not the bad guy. He's just very complicated. And everyone, that role is a fiction. It's an illusion. I think that, you know, I think that's, at its best, I think this show does what I always think is great about Arthur Miller's writing is that you go, there is no bad guy in Arthur Miller's writing. There are just people doing their best, and there's a kind of inevitable, tragic element to what happens because you see the flaws in people. Yeah. You see a flaw in someone, you see a sort of weakness, you understand what they're doing to try and cover that up. But you can also see that people are on a collision course with each other, and tragedy happens, but there's catharsism, because you know there's no bad guy. There's no easy answer to go, well, that happened because of that bad person. Go, that happened because we're human. Right. And we suffer, and, you know, and we have compassion and all those sort of things. And I think at its best, that's what this show or any show can do.